Previously, we discussed about the Bitcoin and Lightning Network. Today, we're going to discuss about the proof of work and its merit, and also we'll dive a bit on proof of stake disadvantages and advantages. So both of them, we're comparing both of these protocols for the basically validating the blockchains. So yeah. So maybe you can give us like an introduction about the proof of work and why do you think it's superior?
Perfect. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to do a quick overview of what proof of work is, and then we can kind of go down the road as to why it's necessary. So for those of you, whoever's watching and doesn't know, proof of work is a method for a consensus mechanism. It is a way that there's a consensus of trust between a distributed ledger. So these are ledgers all around the world, blockchains, whatever you want to call them, that are able to maintain a format of trust. Now, proof of work is not the only type of consensus mechanism. There's proof of stake, which we're going to talk about. There's a variety of different kinds. However, the most popular or well-known is proof of work because, in my opinion, it is the most natural option for it. Now, the one caveat with proof of work is you must exchange energy to participate. The biggest complaint about proof of work is that it is too energy intensive and whatnot, but that is actually a feature, not a bug, because that means that even if you just want to participate, you have to expend energy to even play in the game. And then that's where the game theory comes in, where if you're already participating, you would be far better off to be a good actor in the monetary network than to try and attack it, because at the end of the day, when you attack a proof of work network, it's very expensive. It's not very cost efficient. So you're going to lose out a lot more than you would gain. So the proof of work aspect is kind of what it protects the entire network. Now, the biggest issue I believe is extremely important is that there is the option of moving Bitcoin to proof of stake or some other type of network. I have no issues with other consensus mechanisms. I think there's going to be a variety of them. The crypto sphere has lots of different experimentation and different ideas of things that they want to play with. However, we have to all understand what is at stake here. And the most important thing is we are purely information when it comes to Bitcoin. It is 100% pure and unbridled information, okay? We're working in a realm that there is no one person that we can ask or rely on, or if we do, that defeats the whole purpose. So all we have in the ether world, in the internet online world, is information and the transformation of information. That is it, okay? So the transformation of information takes computation. And computation requires energy. That is just a fact of the laws of physics. It is something that if you want to compute, you want to calculate, and you're operating within the laws of physics, you have to exchange energy for this computation. So proof of work is necessary because you're anchoring something that happened in the digital world to the real world. So with proof of work, it is very expensive, costly. You have to invest time, energy, and effort to do the work. But once the work is done, you can verify it very easily. So one thing I like to compare or give people an example of, picture the Mr. Olympia, the final stage where there's 6 to 8 of these massive bodybuilders. Just by looking at them, you know that somebody didn't just snap their fingers and get to be in that shape. They have the proof of work. And actual proof of work actually permeates every area of our lives. Art, relationships, business, athletics. You have to put in the work to get the type of result, right? So that's kind of a comparison that I give, whereas proof of stake is not. Proof of stake isn't anchored by the laws of physics. Proof of stake is going to have a variety of different benefits that proof of work doesn't, because proof of stake is not limited by the laws of physics.
I agree with all these points wholeheartedly. So I think these points are actually, it makes a lot of sense, but in the absence of alternatives, what do I mean by alternatives? So first, let's decide on the goals that we need. First, we need to validate the transactions. Second, we need a mechanism to issue the currency. So, for example, to issue the coins. in a way that's basically makes sense. Like what you mentioned, for example, in Bitcoin is it's very logical because you're spending energy and you're getting this in return. It's anchored in physics. And then third thing, we need to validate it after it's already validated. We need to check the history basically of all transactions very easily. So I think the aspect of checking the history of the blockchain is almost the same between proof of stake and proof of work, of checking the history because it's just using the nodes. It's something, the same technology that's been used like for almost decades now in the torrent system, which is basically peer-to-peer. So you're just reviewing the same ledger, the same files. You are checking that everyone have the same files and everyone can download them from everyone else. So it's very hard to manipulate these files. So this aspect is almost similar. It varies in this between these two protocols is basically the validation aspect and also the issuance. So in the issuance, there is a lot of it's very hard to argue with proof of work on this point because it makes sense that there is an issuance mechanism that first of all is like not like it doesn't depend on someone's wealth. So basically, just like not someone will come in and sweep in and control the whole network, or at least control the whole economy of a certain currency. The second problem, which is that it's basically it's not non-inflationary. So non-inflationary, this one can be controlled based on the code. So if the code is fixed and everyone is using the same code, so obviously, for example, someone can fork Bitcoin right now and make an unlimited Bitcoin, but that will not be called Bitcoin because it's forked. So the same for proof of stake. Obviously, much harder in Bitcoin because a lot of people already have consensus agreement on what is the code that's being used for Bitcoin. So, but for other currencies, it might happen. It's already happened actually for a couple of cryptos. So yeah, this is not ideal. It's very bad. So this point is like almost a draw, but yeah, Bitcoin still wins in this. For the first one, is a complete draw almost. But for this, I think the most contested is actually the validation mechanism itself. So the validation mechanism, yes, there are some proof of stake who are very inadequate. So for example, they will have the ability for anyone who have like a major share in the whole coin, like basically a major voting share, because it's more like about like a voting system, the ability to control the network. So let's say an exchange, it's not even an owner of the crypto, but the people deposited this money, let's say Binance, for example, they will realistically practically have control over this network. They can change basically the consensus because they own most of the voting shares. But in many other coins, especially the big ones, the voting system is not simple as the voting shares. The voting share acts similar to the Bitcoin network in terms of, yes, it gives you like an advantage. Like, for example, you will have maybe more possibilities to validate the network, but it's not like an absolute validation. Similar to Bitcoin, like, for example, in Bitcoin, there's a few mining blocks, like mining pools who control the network, but obviously none of them can just swoop in and just like do whatever they want. They still have to follow the mechanism of the network. So it's similar to like that for most of bigger proof of stake blockchains. And also there is a slashing mechanism. So yes, Bitcoin, it's very hard to attack the network because it costs a lot of money. Also for crypto, not all of them, but some of them, they have activated slashing mechanism, which means that if is a bad actor or in bad faith, someone tries to make a wrong validation, so not an actual validation, maybe they try to give themselves some extra coins or do some changes in the history of the blockchain, they will lose their funds. So that's why this is a complaint, like, for example, about I think we touched about this in our last conversation as well, that, for example, if for Ethereum, you have like, I think 32 ETH or something like similar to that you need to stake in order to validate. So yes, this is an upfront cost, but it's just a deposit to make sure that you are like basically a good actor, which is also similar to Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin, yes, it's much cheaper to get just one ant miner or something, but the problem is at the end of the day, to actually earn an income from it, like a company operating, you need actually a lot of these. So at the end of the day, it's a similar cost, in my opinion. And also, the good thing about the staking mechanism is that you can withdraw this at some point if you want to stop the business. But in Bitcoin, it's if you sell these miners, most of the time they are outdated and they don't sell for much. So yeah, so I think it's a very similar on this. And also in the energy consumption, even though Bitcoin consumes a lot of energy, if you look at the banks, you look at any other industry, I mean, for example, even one smartphone consumes just to manufacture it until it reaches the end consumer, it uses a lot of energy. So I mean, this is very fine if you're talking about moving billions of dollars. So yeah, I think it makes sense. But the thing is, I think the only aspect that I'm fearful of from the proof of work energy consumption is actually about control. So basically, in terms of getting energy, yes, you can get it from, for example, private sources like some miners do, especially in Europe, I think, or maybe in Canada, they will have their own like source of mine, like for example, a dam or a river or something like this to mine on their own. So it's maybe privately controlled and it's not as monitored from the states. But a lot of other places, like for example, what we saw in China, they were basically relying on the grid. And when you rely on the grid, there is a very easy detection methodology. I mean, if you can see the surges in the electricity at any one place, and this happened already in a couple of countries, they would come in, they would raid the place, destroy the machines and everything. So yes, the whole network survives, but it's unsustainable if any one government can just decide to remove your system. For proof of stake, it's much harder to detect because it's just internet usage. So even if the government regulation changes, the network is still sustainable. It doesn't harm its users or its validators. So I think this is the only, and also quantum computing. Quantum computing may be years ahead, but a lot of proof of stake crypto are quantum proof because even though you have the power, you still need to, it's not about power, you need to own the token. And if you buy all, like for example, yes, some would argue that you need to buy, like for example, 50% of the token, but even then, you still don't have full control over the network. You will get more chances to validate the network and maybe manipulate it, but you still also risk slashing and all this. So I think it's like more about like, my idea is that I think Bitcoin will survive for a long time, but I think for a very long term, maybe a proof of stake will be better. This also not to mention the speed of transaction. I mean, the speed of transaction of other crypto is much more faster. So even myself, I have Bitcoin. So I would imagine that Bitcoin is like what you also mentioned before. That is like a store of value. It's like the central bank of the whole ecosystem. And then the others are maybe like just, let's say, the daily currencies that we use. But then you made a very good argument also about Lightning Network, which is that it basically provides a solution while you are using like the underlying asset is very solid. So actually, like the most convinced I am was with the Lightning Network was last time in our discussion. So it was like really very compelling argument that not everything needs to be on an immutable ledger, because like if you're doing a very trivial transaction, even sometimes you don't want to, like for privacy sake, you don't want everything to be out in the open, especially like if you're just doing some simple stuff. And then, so it's a security risk in itself. So so I think the Lightning Network might be nice, but so the only argument I think is just about the energy consumption. I'm curious to know your thoughts about that. Like, is it easy to detect, easy to crack on? Like for example, the US are preparing some regulation against mining. So what do you think?
I think it's a very valid topic because this is where we're going. So energy usage, as I mentioned before, for proof of work is a feature, not a bug. And I think once people really start to understand the economics of energy generation around the world, they're going to understand that Bitcoin is going to be the biggest, and I mean this not to exaggerate, it's going to be the single biggest generator of renewable energy resources and ways to actually capture energy than we've ever seen. Because up until now, every renewable sector has been granted by governments. Governments have been the only ones that were able to fund it because our way of thinking of it is we need economies of scale. So we understand that renewable projects are going to be expensive, and as technology increases and efficiencies increase, we're going to get to a point that it's going to make more monetary sense. The biggest issue with renewable energies is it's not dependable. It's not consistent. It is the sun, it is wind, it comes and goes. Natural gas, nuclear, coal, these are the most consistent types of energy. So we're always going to need a baseline for those. What Bitcoin does that is extremely unique, that to this day now, I think Bitcoin Conference is just getting sponsored by Shell for the next 2 years. So now we've got one of the biggest oil companies in the world sponsoring it because now they're sniffing around. I want you to, whoever's listening to this, to really listen to it and rewind this after I say it and listen to it again. Bitcoin monetizes every single type of energy from every single source in the world. Now, understand what this does. Let's say, like you mentioned, you have a creek going in your backyard. Normally, it wouldn't make sense to create a energy generation location because you're too far from population, and to transfer energy from where it's being generated to where the society needs it to, you're losing the energy as well. So it doesn't make it have economical sense to do that. However, now you don't need to transfer the energy anywhere. You literally need to generate it on the location. So as long as you have a source for the energy, you have a Bitcoin miner, and you have an energy connection, you can monetize it anywhere. So that ties in fantastically to your point about the governments can shut it down. Yes, on grid, it is very simple for the government to say, okay, we're seeing a huge amount of energy use from this specific location. Best estimates of what happened in China is there was still 30% of miners still operating in China even after the ban. So I think it will displace them, but I think that's what makes Bitcoin so marvelous is the fact that it is anti-fragile. The attacks are good. You're going to see a drop in something when a government or an outside entity attacks it, but Bitcoin reacts very quickly. So when you think about stranded energy, when you think about wasted energy, now we're talking to renewable power plants that, so the biggest issue with renewables is, let's say sunlight. Sunlight is generating an excess amount of energy. Let's say they're generating 100 gigawatts, just a random number. But the use case for our society where we have the solar set up is only 10 gigawatts. So the issue is that 90 gigawatts, we don't have the capacity to save it for another day. So up until Bitcoin mining, we never had a way to utilize this excess energy. Whereas now we've got these little machines that will eat your excess energy until you don't want it to. So let's say you got the flip and now you're like, okay, now we need more energy. We can't use the Bitcoin mining right now. Bitcoin mining is 100% responsive. You turn off the machines within 5 minutes and you're pointing the energy to where you need it to. So it's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to see renew, and we're in discussions with them. I'm teaching them. I'm going to renewable energy companies and saying, listen, you may not believe in Bitcoin, but what would you do with a machine that can eat your excess energy? And they're like, okay, well, this is what we would do. And you your economies of scale completely changes because now you're monetizing every kilowatt of energy as opposed to seeing 90% of it go down the drain. So that's what I would say for the energy use case. I genuinely believe we're going to get to a point where energy costs are going to trend as close to zero that we've ever seen because now we have an actual reason for people to go out there and find and monetize the cheapest sources of energy. Whether the governments are going to shut them down or not, I can't comment on that because I know what's going to happen. I just don't think they're going to be able to shut down all of them because you can maybe shut down the mega farms, but you could not even imagine how many farms are spread out around the world that are under 1 megawatt that are operating off of a sea can in the middle of the forest. People who are my favorite use case. So right now, the governments in Canada charge you a tax to flare your excess methane. What usually happens for people who aren't familiar with the oil drilling process is when you drill for oil, a natural byproduct is natural gas, methane, and usually, or propane gas. Usually, you would repurpose that gas and take it to society and use it for a variety of purposes. However, sometimes these wells are too far, the Rockies and wherever it is, just it's too difficult to get this and bring it to civilization. So it's easier for these companies to just burn it. The flames that you see on an oil well, it's them just burning excess gas. So they have to pay a tax for this, charge for this, because they're wasting and they're burning and they're taking a part of this carbon tax thing of whatever they've established. So now what we're telling them is, hey, you don't even have to like Bitcoin, but we will give you money to run these machines while you're burning it. So now the economies of scale completely change because now something that someone was burning just to get rid of, they're able to monetize right away. These are just examples of countless ways that people around the world are monetizing access and garbage gas. We've got a methane company right now in LA that is monetizing, and they've connected pipes to the methane gases that are produced in a landfill, because landfills are one of the biggest producers of methane gas, which causes greenhouse effects. So it's a pilot project, but what they're doing is they're using methane to repurpose and go into the generator, and they're mining Bitcoin with gases that come off of landfills. So once people understand that, the conversation should not be energy use is bad. We use right now this conversation of you and I, we are worlds apart, and I'm having a conversation with somebody. It's marvelous, right? But we're using 100 times more energy than we were using, in the 1800s, right? So energy use is not bad. It's about using, carbon uses or different types of sources. And that's not going to happen overnight. So the goal is to educate people on showing them that Bitcoin really is a fantastic tool for the energy aspect. And my last point is proof of stake may work. I wouldn't comment on it in any facet in the sense of it will never work. It's not a good idea. My only point is for what Bitcoin does, and that is a ledger that must keep track and must protect the ledger. You need a proof of work to participate in it, because proof of work keeps us all operating within the laws of physics. It is impossible for you to send 1 million emails a second on a proof of work network that's charging you even a minute amount. You're still being charged something, as opposed to proof of stake, which allows you to defy the laws of physics and you can do whatever you want, right? So to the example I gave of the Mr. Olympia, in proof of stake, you can have a 4-year-old on stage in Mr. Olympia because they're not operating by the same guidelines. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but for me, it's proof of stake just says, okay, you're on this network and you're dealing with the rules and the consensus that a certain group of people have established. Regardless of how decentralized with validators and all these things there is a centralized group of people that have come together to set this up. So you have to acknowledge and say, okay, I am going to join their realm and abide by their rules. And just the way proof of stake is set up, where slashing is there and validators and all these things, but at the end of the day, it rewards the biggest people on the network. And that's just, it's an eventuality. It's not going to happen overnight, but in the long run, biggest entities will continue to take up more. Whereas on Bitcoin, whether you have 1 Bitcoin or you have 1 million Bitcoins, you are still competing on the same rules, regardless of what happened yesterday, to compete with the Bitcoins that are being mined today.
I think the biggest point here is that you alluded to is decentralization. So I think in most proof of stake protocols, the biggest weak link is basically the validator acceptance to the network. So whenever you start to validate, you cannot just like Bitcoin, you just open your PC and install the software and you're done. You actually have to take permission to basically start the validation process. Some would say that maybe the entity that's doing this is like a foundation, but at the end of the day, there is some centralization and some weak link there. So let's say a government entity takes control of this validation, maybe organizer or so it's like a very, very risky thing. So yeah, I think this is a very important challenge for proof of stake protocols, because then this is already solved by Bitcoin. Because of the proof of work, you can just connect and you are done. But with proof of stake, you cannot basically do that. You need to validate that this person actually, for example, have the enough ETH or enough whatever coin, and then only then maybe you can allow them on the network. And not only that, you can list them. Like one of the most important things in staking is that how it works is that when you actually want to participate in the process, you have to choose like a staking pool in order to put your coins there. So to decide on this, you have like these aggregators who aggregate these staking pools, and a lot of them, they have connection to the foundation, which is running the whole show. So yeah, obviously some of them have like a roadmap to have like a complete decentralization and like voting mechanism and a governance model. But at the end of the day, if you fail in any of these weak links, then you are in big trouble. But so Bitcoin just averted all this from the start by having the proof of work mechanism. So yeah, this is a point that's very hard to argue against for
I think it's important to note that like just the more surface area there is to attack, you have to think adversarially. And if a government can attack it, if a company or a corporation can stop it, they're going to try. And with proof of stake, like right now with Ethereum's proof of stake, there was a centralized group, whether it's the foundation, whether it's a group of developers, there was a group of people that said, hey, let's work together to switch this over to proof of stake. So with proof of work, like with Bitcoin, it's not even a discussion because anyone can fork it off, go proof of stake, do whatever you want. But the original chain is going to be completely oblivious to whatever it is everyone else is trying to do. And it's going to continue to operate under proof of work. So I always just like saying it's just two completely different worlds. And for an immutable ledger, in my opinion, proof of work is absolutely mandatory. Like proof of work is the backbone of Bitcoin, right? It's fundamentally important. Without the proof of work, like right now, the proof of work, for people to understand the amount of computation that goes in to protecting the ledger. Right now, last I checked, the Bitcoin mining was 355 exahashes. One exahash is 1 quintillion hashes. A hash is a computation. Quintillion is 18 zeros behind the one. And there's 355 of them. So Bitcoin is by far the most secure blockchain that anyone's ever seen on this earth. So even when somebody talks about other proof of work blockchains, I always say, unless it's the strongest, that means technically if it's not the strongest can point their hash power and attack the weakest. So I always like to focus on the strongest proof of work blockchain because that's the one that's going to adversarially be most targeted and attacked.
Yeah, I think that makes much sense. I fully agree that proof of work is good. So I still think that maybe proof of stake has its chance, but I still have a lot of hurdles to prove its worth compared to the proof of work, which is already proven at least for more than a decade now, or almost. It's very interesting. So, by the way, do you have any maybe you can shed a light a bit again on the Lightning Network, like any closing thoughts on the Lightning Network again? Because I was very interested in your view of the Lightning Network. Like, how do you foresee the Lightning Network maybe within the next 5 years? How do you think it will look like?
Lightning Network. So that's the thing is I deal with Bitcoin every day. And Bitcoin to me is like the most interesting innovation. And I love it because there's so many different aspects that you can go down. Lightning is its whole other ecosystem that is growing at such an interesting and just revolutionary pace. The things that they're doing on Lightning right now. So there's a company in Canada, I was just talking to them, we're testing other stuff. The biggest issue for people is the technological learning curve. So what we're seeing a lot happen right now, which kind of goes against the ethos of Bitcoin, which is take control of your keys. A lot of Lightning nodes that are offered out there is custodial. So you're trusting a company to handle the liquidity aspect of your Bitcoin. I don't think the pendulum is going to swing the other way. I think what's going to happen is liquidity providers are going to be the exchanges. I see Lightning offering, like for our exchange, we're going to be offering free withdrawals as long as people are using Lightning because it's that much cheaper and easier to kind of go off and on. It's frictionless, right? I see books that you can read and stream by the page. So you don't have to buy the book up front. You're going to pay a quarter of a penny page as you flip it, or maybe a Netflix or YouTube that you're paying by the second of streaming, or video games where you can place 100 sats as the reward and you and your friend can play a game online and the winner has the Lightning deposit into their Lightning wallet. The possibilities truly are endless. One area that I'm really excited about seeing Lightning being implemented is some sort of a social media where you have to put up a very small amount of Lightning or a very small amount of sats. But like I mentioned to the proof of work aspect, if you're a troll or a scammer who's spinning up thousands of fake accounts, it costs you nothing because you're not operating the laws of physics. Now, if a social media platform came out and said you have to put up 100 sats, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things, but if you're a scammer doing millions of these, that would end up adding up and affecting you. So I can see Lightning being used as a way to prevent people from scamming as well. So I think the use cases coming down the pipeline are mind-boggling. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen over the next 2 years. As Lightning adoption continues to grow, the liquidity is going to grow, which means more the channels can handle bigger transactions. So remittances on Lightning. So Lightning is layer 2. I can see other things being built layer 3. So they're built
That's
on the
really
Lightning
fascinating.
protocol,
Yeah, that's
right? And so the biggest issue with stocks, a lot of people complain about stocks because when you trade stocks, the stock is not settling for 3 days. So they've got a lot of these different blockchain ideas and things to allow stocks to trade quicker. Well, once you have something on Lightning and you peg it to one Satoshi, you're going to be able to settle. You're going to do things that everybody who's doing in crypto land, you're going to be able to do it on Lightning. Still anchored to the main chain, to the main blockchain in the internet world, right? So I think Lightning is something to really watch out for. I haven't even scratched the surface, to be honest with you. You can read about something new every day and still not even go through 10% of it.
Amazing. Thanks for the conversation and for the closing thoughts on Lightning. So where can people
Absolutely.
find? It's One Bitcoin Canada, right?
OneBitcoin.ca, the number one Bitcoin.ca. My email is jacob@onebitcoin.ca. We do consulting, we do talks, we have resources. Our goal is just to educate the general public who's very skeptical of this asset. It's not for people it's for everybody. It's for everyone to understand more and more, but the real goal is to help people understand that Bitcoin's not a Ponzi. It's now 15 years almost. Before it was okay, they're gonna, it's just there's nothing backing it. There's this, there's that. And now we're at a point where you've got Tesla, corporations, you've got countries adopting it. So we're just trying to bring that information to the public and give them a partner that they can ask questions and, they don't feel a certain type of way. They understand that we're here to just educate them on Bitcoin.
Excellent. Thanks for your time today. Have a nice day.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
You too. Bye.